A lot of people have seen the changes in our daughter and they're like, oh, she must have
grown out of it.
They're like, how do you know she didn't grow out of the issues? And we said, well,
just the other day.
Just the other day, she got something with glutamate in it, and the raging was horrible. And that gave us a glimpse of how our life would be all day, every day. Now she's in her early 20s. The same with our other kids too. If they accidentally get glutamate or if they get folic acid, we get a glimpse of how they would be as a teenager, as a young adult, without this balancing of their brain chemistry and without eliminating these chemicals. And it's not a pretty sight. No, but I have to be honest and say I'm not pretty either when I get these chemicals. So it's not just for our kids. I have to admit it's really changed how I parent. And if you're considering making these changes, we suggest do them for yourself first. Take care of you and your brain chemistry first. You'll be in a much better place to be supportive and helping teach your child these changes as well. You've got to put your oxygen mask on first, just like in an airplane. So we want to share with you some things that we learned about eliminating certain foods and chemicals, because we saw such a change in mood in our house, in our whole house, specifically for our daughter, but it's helped me, it's helped James, it's helped all of our kids, because these chemicals affect every person, and some people even more severely. So, and there's some chemicals that would be great to cover today, but we don't cover those. Mostly we just cover those things that affect everybody's brain chemistry, everybody's mood. And so since we've implemented these things, we've had a lot more calm in our house, a lot more peace. We have great, effective family meetings at this point, which never were able to happen before. So we'll start where we started, which is really with our daughter's story. Our oldest was diagnosed with autism, inattentive ADD, and anxiety, and multiple learning delays. But what we noticed was at 18 months, she had tantrums throughout the day. I counted 5 tantrums alone, just preparing her to leave the house. So brushing her hair, tantrum, threw herself on the ground, changing her diaper, tantrum, getting her dressed, tantrum. So it was really unmanageable from 18 months. And then it only got worse throughout her life, all the way up through to the time that she was 14 years old. And at that point, she was stronger. She became aggressive with her siblings, well, and with us too. She, throughout that time, was showing some difficulty with social skills. The learning delays really became more pronounced. And then she started to threaten to run away at that point. And so we really feared for her safety. We got frustrated with the lack of peace in our home because there was constant fighting among the kids, but especially with her. And we saw these little moments of just the sweet girl underneath. And we thought, okay, that's who she really is. The rest of this behavior isn't her character or her personality. There's just got to be something going on in her internal environment that's causing this, because we tried different parenting techniques, we tried supplements, we tried therapies, medication, we tried cutting out sugar. And I say we tried those with little success because there was a little bit, like the cutting out sugar made a difference for her, but then she would go get some at a party and then she would be tantruming again. Medications, we did have her on some medications at different times. Some resulted with a calmer daughter, but she hated them, so she refused to take them. So we felt we had exhausted pretty much every option that we could find. So I brought this to James, the scientist, and I said, you've got to try to figure out the science of this. We know food is affecting her. What else? What else can we change? And he really got to work and started looking into DNA. He started finding solutions in her DNA specifically, but also found some really interesting connections between DNA and mood, and specifically methylation, which is kind of a new topic of interest today in the field of science. And so what really finally worked for us was like a threefold approach. The first was eliminating neuro disruptors. So those were chemicals in our foods. The second was balancing her methylation. And you may hear us bring that up once in a while. That is a total
topic for another day.
Deep topic for another day. And then supporting her deficiencies that showed up in her DNA. And so doing those three things really brought her to a different level. I put the improvements we saw on the bottom. These are just some of them. I mean, we saw so many with test scores, with social interactions, with I love how she became super talkative. She apologized to me for the first time when she was 15, and it was for one of her tantrums, which I was shocked, because in the past she would throw a tantrum, have a huge outburst, and we would try to talk about it once she was calm, and it was like she didn't remember that it ever happened. So how do we train her to express herself better the next time when we couldn't kind of go over how she was feeling this time and what led to that meltdown? So
in fact, she made so many improvements that by the time she was 18, her neuropsychologist was ready to take her off the spectrum. I mean, he was ready to not give her that diagnosis.
She still had learning delays, but he wanted to take away her ASD diagnosis. She is a level 2, but he said, I don't know if this is legal to say.
Well,
he won't tell you who her therapist, psychologist was.
But
he said, we'll keep her on the spectrum on her diagnoses because she doesn't need supports. And it's easier to get if she has a easily recognizable diagnosis.
But she'd improved in all of her testing that they did from when she was 14.
Her drawing, her attention, her scholastics, everything just soared after making these changes. And a lot of these can be super scary, especially changing the diet. But we have some tricks that can help, and also we have some workarounds with supplements too. So yeah, we'll get to that at the end.
You ready? Okay. Yeah. So as we began this journey, one of the first things that we discovered as I was looking at the DNA and looking at specific things to Hannah, but also to others, and I saw this was really prevalent, was there is a large percentage of the world population, not just here in the US, but in the world, of people that have issues in metabolizing folic acid. Now, folic acid is a synthetic, and we'll get into that version of vitamin B9. It's found naturally, but in foods, but folic acid is typically added in as a supplement. A lot of times women who are pregnant take extra folic acid because of some studies that we'll go over as well. But we found that folic acid was something that affected a lot of people with these genetic problems, but it also affected people who didn't have genetic problems. We learned to figure this out. For our daughter, it was a massive disruptor. We knew from experience once we started cutting it out how profound an effect it had on her brain chemistry because of what we discussed earlier with methylation, that we're not going to dive into the science behind it, but it basically disrupted her brain chemistry as it stayed in her system for quite a while. Another thing that would cause disruptions in her brain chemistry were not just MSG, monosodium glutamate, but a wide version of free glutamates that are found naturally in a lot of foods. So that was something that actually took even longer, that we're going to show some tricks of where to find them and what to look for and all of that. Those really, because glutamate is actually one of the, most people don't talk about it, but it's 70% of your neurotransmission. And glutamate can cause a lot of disruption in the excitability of your brain chemistry. And so we found this was also a massive disruptor of her brain chemistry. And you don't necessarily have to have a genetic predisposition for this to be the case. And then dextrins, that was the last one that we found. We each year we got better and better and saying, okay, we're good, but can we do it better? And we found that dextrins, maltodextrin is a big one, but any dextrins, these are smaller. They're not necessarily considered sugars, but they are breakdown of starch products that are used as sweeteners. You'll find them a lot in different things that we'll go over. And so when we finally got to the end of just these three, we're just like, can we eat anymore? I mean, we really weren't sure. We had to become experts in where to find them because we just had to eliminate all of these from our daughter's diet. But we found that it wasn't just affecting our oldest daughter, it was affecting all of us. So as we went through this process, our kids have come to know these as the evil three, the three that we look out for in all of our foods. So we're going to go into more detail on these. Just a quick history of folic acid.
And folic acid, you don't have to worry about that outside of the US, which is really
Yeah.
nice for you guys. But
Yeah.
in the US, it's in so many of our processed foods and convenience foods, we really have to look out for folic acid.
Yeah. And we'll go through some of the biggest areas where folic acid is found. It's not just supplement form for women who are pregnant, although that's one of those things that is highly used. The studies that they did initially on folic acid, the CDC studies and NIH and all of that, they basically showed that it reduced incidences of spina bifida. And so that's why for pregnancy they say you got to take a lot of folic acid because that's what the studies were done with. In fact, at that time when those studies were being done, they're like, look, the process back in World War II, where they would basically get
Well, even before World War II.
even before it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
The general process of grinding, milling wheat into white flour.
Yeah.
You would lose so many nutrients in that process. And
They-
that's why they justified adding a different form of B9 back into white
Yeah.
flour.
They started with other vitamins. They didn't actually add folic acid until the mid 90s. They started saying, well, you know what? Because of this study on spina bifida, we need to enrich food not only with, these other vitamins that you lose in the flour purification, in bleaching process and other things like that. So in the mid 90s, they started adding it back in with these other enrichment. And then in the last few decades, they've now been doing studies on folate, which is the natural form of vitamin B9 that's usually lost when you're processing wheat flour. And it's hard because scientists really will not go against what is commonly
Accepted?
yes. And so it's difficult to get studies that are designed to refute the folic acid studies. Nobody really wants to touch that. But there are now studies coming out where they're comparing and looking at the effects of folic acid versus folate, both on pregnancy and on other problems. And people are they're skirting around, but if you read between the lines, you can find that they are starting to say, look, folate is the better version of vitamin B9. They haven't done studies on whether folate is better for you during pregnancy, so we can't say that. But there are studies coming out where they're looking at that there are fewer incidences of miscarriages using folate rather than folic acid. They don't want to come straight out and say that folic acid is causing miscarriages, but they are saying that they're showing fewer incidences of miscarriages. So it's a messy history. Folic acid is one of those things where if you tell people not to take it, you're going to get
A lot of pushback.
you're going to get pushback on both sides.
But if you cut it out for 3 to 4 days, see how you feel, or your children see how they feel, and then introduce it back in on the 5th day, you will see a difference. And you will see a difference more in some kids than others, or more members of your family than others. I used to be a yelly mom. because I have genetic mutations that make it difficult to break down folic acid. And my kids called me Monster Mom. I mean, this is after the fact because Monster Mom has been gone for a long, long time.
Yeah.
But it really is influencing our brains, which influences our mood and our behaviors.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of studies done, and you can kind of read this list. I won't necessarily go through each and every single one of them, but just as an overview, folic acid is more shelf stable, which is why they put it and enrich it in foods, because even when you cook it, it still remains stable, whereas folate tends to break down when you cook it. So there is folate lost when you cook foods, even bread, natural wheat that has folate in it. You lose some of that folate when you cook it as it breaks down. You'll find folate mostly in leafy greens, but you'll find it in grains and other things like that. Folic acid has to be processed 3 times by you before it becomes the natural folate. And there are people that have genetic problems in that 3-step process, specifically the last step. You may or may not have heard of the MTHFR gene. It's got a lot of buzz today online. A lot of people are talking about it. It's because it's one of these that's found. If you were to look across different genetics of a wide variety of races, you'll find that on average, it's about 30%. 30% of people in the world across spectrums. It's more or less in different groups, but on average, about 1 in 3 have a problem with processing folic acid. So that's substantial enough to warrant looking at and saying, this may be something to look out, especially if you're extremely sensitive to it.
But in your studies, you found that even if you don't have a problem in those 3 processes of breaking it down, if you eat enough folic acid, if you have enough folic acid in your diet, your body acts as though you have those mutations in your genetics.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes, because they mandate enriching a lot of foods here in the US. They say, oh, you only need this much, but how much enriched foods do we actually eat? And so people actually get a surplus of the folic acid than what they say is the dietary requirement. And that surplus actually creates what's called an unmetabolized version that goes through your body. And that unmetabolized version, while your body's trying to keep up with it, actually interferes with metabolizing it. So there are studies, and we can post a lot of these studies as well that I've read that essentially show this, that if you have enough unmetabolized folic acid, it interferes with your body's ability to process it and slows things down, thus acting as if you have the genetic problem. So we basically,
the biggest bottom line for that, for folic acid, is it's bad for everybody, but it's worse for people with methylation pathway mutations.
Yep. All right, this is your.
Okay, so it's super tricky to read labels for folic acid. We tend to go to organic foods because legally they're not allowed to add more back into the food. Bread, for some reason, is an exception. So bread is super confusing. So and I want to show you guys these 2 labels to kind of give you an idea of how to differentiate. So this one on the left, it does say folic acid 2% on the left in the nutrition facts, but if you go into the ingredients, there's no added folic acid. So this one's actually okay, which is surprising because it does list folic acid. This one's okay because the folic acid is less than 10% and it's not added here in the ingredient list. So what they mean is folate, the natural folate that's found in whole grain wheat. So this one's actually a misnomer. In the US, they will interchange those 2 words, folic acid and folate. You really got to be careful with the labels. Okay, the one on the right, actually this one is less than 10%. So what we want to stay away from, sorry, I meant less than 8%. So this one on the right is not okay. It's got the word enriched. It's got the word folic acid, both here under the ingredients. And then folic acid is at 8%. So this actually is the added folic acid, the man-made folic acid. they really shouldn't be adding folic acid when it's whole wheat because it's already got the natural folate. There's no need to add it, but they will many, many times. Okay, so here's another label. This one is organic. It's the Naked brand, organic whole wheat bread. It says it's simple, transparent, delicious, and they advertise on their website that they only use clean ingredients. They don't add any additives. Oh, here's an additive: enriched bleached wheat flour. So, and then it also lists folic acid here in the ingredients list. So that's where you want to pay attention to, is the ingredients where it might be added to that product. I think so.
Okay,
Oh no, this is me.
that's you.
So so these three chemicals that we're looking at, specifically folic acid, glutamate, dextrin. Folic acid is found in anything with flour.
That's
So
at least here in the US.
in the US, that's right.
Yeah.
We tend to look for gluten-free products when we're out and about and shopping, because oftentimes they won't, most of the time, they won't have it enriched with folic acid. Cereals are a big one. Even rice and corn cereals will be enriched with folic acid, even though there was no folic acid lost in the first place. They have no business putting it back in. So, but still, it's a problem. For glutamate, flavored products like chips, sauces, meats, and broths. So the meats and broths will naturally have MSG that you need to look for.
Well, free glutamate.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Free glutamate.
Yeah.
Chips and sauces, the ottoman, the powdery stuff on the chips like Doritos, that gives that delicious flavor and stimulates the brain.
I don't think I've ever found any flavored chips that don't have some form of
Right.
glutamate.
They've got glutamate and sometimes specifically MSG added right on top of that chip. So the plainer the chip, the better. You still have to look very carefully for ingredients. We're going to show you a huge list of ingredients that will blow your mind, where they hide, where these chemicals hide. Okay, then dextrin, and sometimes it's called maltodextrin. This is a sweetener added to candies, puddings, yogurts, instant hot chocolate. I don't know if it's as bad in other countries with dextrin, but it's in so many of our foods. So especially convenience foods, frozen foods, fast foods. We go to restaurants and oftentimes we ask about these chemicals and they have no idea what's in there. And so we just stay away. If they don't know what's in it, we're not going to eat it. And we'll give you some other rules to live by as well. So here is the huge list.
So
where they hide.
And without going through all of this is just more to show you that it can hide under an enormous number of names. This was something that took me months, and they're still actually expanding this list. We are finding new ways for them to use it because people are kind of on the lookout now. You'll actually have labeling which says no MSG. They'll literally write it like no MSG. Yet if you look down, you'll find that it has yeast extract. Well, that's what MSG is. Yeast extract is MSG. So they found ways around being able to label it because a lot of places now say, look, you need to show whether there's MSG in it, because for some people it can cause, various allergic reactions or other things like that. We found that free glutamate causes inflammation, not only in the gut, but also in the brain. There's been a lot of studies saying, no, it doesn't pass the blood-brain barrier. Well, it doesn't have to. There's nerves in your intestines that it can actually cause neurons to fire in your brain. And so just by having it in your digestive system, it can cause overexcitability in your brain chemistry. And that was something we also started finding in our daughter, that glutamate set her off. Actually, our youngest son is the most sensitive to it. He is such a stalwart with anything. He won't even eat it if there's a question of having some free glutamate. Now, it's not all, this is something that people add to. Sometimes it's a natural product of the food. For example, Parmesan cheese. Parmesan cheese has about 17% free glutamate, just because it's how the bacteria break the protein down of the milk, and it creates. I mean, that's really where you get that umami flavor of Parmesan cheese, is the glutamate. And a lot of people like that. They like the bite of the cheese and all of that. But this is a source of natural free glutamate, and I have to avoid it like the plague. It makes me crazy, more than anything else. And so there's a lot of this is one of those things that we've stopped trying to tell people to learn this list. In fact, Amanda has created a short list to kind of help with some key words that you can look for on the ingredients label.
Yeah, and you may want to print out this whole list and keep it on your fridge, take it with you shopping. We refer to it often just because the list is so long. We cannot memorize this. James probably doesn't memorize.
I do.
Because he goes over it all the time. And we would love to create an app that you can just scan the ingredient list and it will highlight in red all the chemicals that are bad for you. But I've created this short list on the right. I did not put that in the document yet, so I will send Holly an updated version of this one. But the short list really helps because you're looking for specific keywords like yeast. If there's like autolyzed yeast or yeast food or yeast nutrient. Yeast on its own is just fine.
If it says commercial yeast, it's fine.
If it's commercial yeast, if it's just the plain yeast used to rise bread. So if you have yeast at home, keep using it. That's totally fine. It's the process that they use to break down this yeast is what creates
the yeast used to break down the product.
Oh, it's the yeast that's used to break down the product. Okay,
yeah.
So it's yeast combined with some other product that creates the glutamate problem. Hydrolyzed anything that needs to be avoided. Modified anything needs to be avoided.
Most commonly, you'll see it say modified food starch. That's kind of the blanket term.
Modified food starch, modified cornstarch as well. Cornstarch on its own is fine, but when it's modified, stay away. Anything isolate and anything syrup. So we found some quote organic treats at Costco. We love Costco for their organic, but we found one product that had quote organic brown rice syrup. We thought it was fine. Our kids were reacting to it. This is usually how we find these chemicals, is our kids react to it. And we go back, research every chemical and go, oh, this is not okay. This one's causing the inflammation on the brain. So syrups, it sounds great. It's not. And again, they keep adding to this list as people catch on to the old names. They add new names and trick us up. It's just so frustrating. So I've created 2 rules of thumb. Stay away from foods that have more than 5 ingredients. It'll usually have some kind of horrible chemical listed hidden in those ingredient lists. The other, so is if you can't identify it in your cupboard, stay away from it. So for example, if you had a recipe and it said one of the ingredients is artificial flavor. What is that?
Right.
Could you find that specific ingredient in your cupboard?
Okay.
And know exactly what they're talking? You don't know what they're talking about because artificial flavor is hiding who knows how many different chemicals. And they're allowed to do that. They're allowed to hide these different items in there. What about spices? What if you were making curry and then it just says your next ingredient is spices? Yeah. Well, does that mean turmeric or does that mean oregano? So it's so vague. Stay away from those vague blanket ingredient names. That's all I'm trying to say.
Now here's one where we found this, and it basically has what we would call the evil 3. This is basically top ramen. And we just circled a couple of things. You have the enriched flour. Notice they don't write out what they enriched it with. Sometimes they don't have to, so they'll just say enriched. But usually that's a key word. Enriched will mean folic acid. It'll be like 5 different vitamins and one of them is folic acid. Here's one of those where we said autolyzed yeast extract. That's basically MSG. And then there's maltodextrin. So it's got all three in this one thing. We just wanted to show an example of how, sometimes you're going to get all three, sometimes you get one or two, and it's very hard not to get any. I've had to become well, we didn't even realize, look, hydrolyzed soy protein is right here too. Yeah, there's more. Well, natural flavor, that's also one, that's a blanket statement. So
We need to update this.
yeah, when you have to be a chemist to kind of know what's in it, it becomes extremely difficult. Now, this can all seem really overwhelming because it took us years eliminating folic acid first, then eliminating MSG, and then finding dextrin was the last one. It took us years. We don't want people to have to do elimination diet and find years. We want to give them the information and help them at least get a large part of the way.
Yeah, so the first step is change out the food that you eat the most, not the food that has the most folic acid or the most chemicals. Just what's the food you eat the most? For our family, it was cereal and bread. So we started with those two. We looked for alternatives. We tested different breads. We tested different cereals that our kids might like. We had a lot of fails. That's okay. Just keep going. Organic is usually the best choice. Again, with the bread, you can see like they'll hide it, organic, enriched, whole wheat. It's horrible. But switching to organic products is much easier than trying to just make everything from scratch. If you can make it from scratch, fantastic. You can switch out your flour and you're done. But changing over just the products we're using eases some of the pain, especially for kids that want something quick or they're used to mac and cheese, that kind of stuff. There's some really
find substitutes for
there's some good brands.
Most, yeah, even Oreos. And you may not think, but there are brands out there and other things
that have moved to organic.
So
the only thing we have not found organic, this is in the US again. Formula is really horrible and it's not available in organic forms in the US. You have to buy it out of the country and it's super expensive. We would love to start some kind of distribution for healthy formula for kids, but we didn't realize with our oldest, we gave her a bottle every night because she slept so
she
good.
Literally was like she was drugged.
It was like she was drugged with folic acid and she would pass out for hours. And the poor thing, I don't know what it was doing to her brain. So we got to keep an eye on those. Shoot for 90%. 80% is okay too. Do not try to just jump in at 100%. That is a way to burn out really quickly, especially if you have kids. You're already treading water. We don't want you to drown. Just start slow and steady. Do not try to start battles you cannot win. We really failed at that one. If they're out of the house, you can't control what they're eating. Restaurants, parties, holidays, if you make it too extreme, kids will fight you on it and you need them to buy in. If they buy in, one day
they will self-regulate.
They will choose the healthier foods. We had kids come home from church or activities or a friend's house and say, hey, they had donuts and I opted out. Is there something at home I can have instead? Oh yeah. Absolutely. We're on board. Like, we absolutely support your decision to wait until you get home. And this is young kids, this is teenagers. When they feel a difference from how they feel at home and how they feel from these other foods, they start to buy in.
We had our youngest, our 15-year-old, just the other day would not have an ice cream shake at an unknown restaurant that we went to after an activity because he could not 100% know what was in it. They didn't know. He's like, I'll just have some ice cream at home. I'll wait. So our 15-year-old was able to say, it's not worth it to me to feel the way that I feel when I have this or that unknown, because he hates it and he self-regulates even better than than most everybody else we know. So they will opt in once they feel the difference.
He really chose that delayed gratification, which is surprising at that age.
Yeah.
So, and then if cutting any of these things out is too much, if you're getting folic acid in your diet, you can supplement with zinc and TMG.
Which is also called betaine.
And that helps reduce the inflammation, but it also circumvents, kind of goes around that traffic jam that the folic acid could be causing. The TMG will help improve mood and keep them calm while that folic acid is getting out of their system. The workaround for glutamate and dextrin.
It's basically ginger root.
Ginger root,
and
that reduces the inflammation.
Ceylon cinnamon reduces inflammation from it as well, and L-theanine. So even if you can't cut any of these things out, we found natural supplements that help with the side effects. It's not an antidote, but
it still have some of the effects,
right,
but it makes it so it's not as extreme.
Right. It reduces it substantially, but it's not one of those, oh, I'll just take this and I'll keep. But if nothing else, if you're like, look, I can't change my diet, they'll at least get you a portion of the way.
Yeah, we did that when we had started eliminating these chemicals when we were on vacation, right? We really didn't have control of the food that was coming in. And so we would just give the kids the supplements. So, and these are in conjunction with each other.
Yes.
So if you do have folic acid, you want to take the zinc and TMG together. If you get dextrin or glutamate, you want the three.
Yeah.
It's like a cocktail of the three: Ceylon cinnamon, L-theanine, and ginger root, all three together. If you don't have access to all three, at least getting one of them helps.
Yeah.
Helps reduce tantrums and the outbursts from the bad mood. So our website is somaticode.com. It's spelled SOMATI code. On the blog that you can read more in depth about the studies that support what we're doing and what we're teaching. And then I have a TikTok called Methylation Mama, and you can learn all about methylation there. I talk a little bit about the food elimination, but mostly balancing the brain chemistry.
Naturally, you can do it
naturally with supplements. So if you have sugar, you can balance back to a calm mood again. But these, food elimination is outside of that methylation.
Yeah, we started with the food elimination and then the balancing came later.
Yeah.
You see the most dramatic effects. We've had people that have taken the challenge where they cut out folic acid for 3 days or 4 days, and then they reintroduce it on the fifth day. And I don't think there's anybody that hasn't gone through that that's not a believer. So we just say, try it out, see if you've seen a difference. And
yeah, that's a big one. We'd love to live outside the US and not have to worry, but we find foreign cookies and stuff that we can eat just fine. So it's interesting. Yeah. Thanks for having us.